My name is Lynette Davis, the blogger over at LynetteDavis.com, and I want to welcome you to the 2016 Be the Change interview series. So I'm super excited. I semi-stalked this next guest online. No, I'm kidding. I didn't. But so that she can come on and share some of her awesomeness with you so you can be inspired and empowered to go and be the change yourself. So I'm not going to go too much into it. I'm going to let her introduce herself and tell you about who she is. So welcome my special guest, Dior Vargas. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So could you go ahead and just tell our viewers here a little bit about who you are and about the work that you do?
So my name is Dior Vargas, and I'm a Latina feminist mental health activist. In September of 2014, I started a photo project called the People of Color and Mental Illness Photo Project. And basically, it's a response to the lack of people of color in the media representation of mental illness. When researching what I was going to do in terms of mental health and what that would look like in terms of my activism, the Google images that came up were overwhelmingly white people, but even more so white women. And so I felt like, why is it that that's the face of mental illness, and why is it that there is no diversity in that representation? And so I decided that I wanted to create a space where people could share photos, holding signs, and say whatever they felt like saying regarding their experience with a mental health condition. And it really blew up. I didn't expect it to turn into something this big, but it's been really amazing. And I have over 100 submissions from all across the US, UK, and Canada. So it's been great. And as a result, I've been able to share my story of someone who lives with mental illness and also a suicide attempt survivor. And I've also been able to travel around the country and, again, share my story, but also advocate for other people, advocate for people in psychiatric wards, advocate for students of color in higher education. So just doing a lot of speaking engagements, which has been really enjoyable for me. And I've just been able to meet so many new people and learn about their individual experiences.
Awesome. Starting off doing a photo project into going into now traveling and speaking, in alignment with all of those things that you do, what do the words "be the change" mean to you?
I think that a lot of us want things to change in the way that the world works. A lot of the things that are going on in society, where there's a lot of racism, classism, there's just so many things that are going on that is really making us unhappy and feeling pretty helpless. And so I think that while we do want to see change happen, I think that we need to put ourselves in a position to do that. And it could be in terms of advocating for oneself or advocating for other people. But I think that we need to actually step in and see what we individuals can do, and see what we can do to make some sort of change, or share articles. There's something that each of us can do in some capacity that can educate people or move people to advocate for themselves. There's just so many things that we could do, and I think that we need to just step it up and not be voyeurs, but people who are actually doing the actions.
Awesome. And I love that you said about people being voyeurs, because so many times people do sit on the sidelines and just kind of watch as things go by, and are just taking things in. And we even are starting to kind of have a culture of voyeurism for the benefit of those who are just watching rather than the people that they are watching. But that's kind of another thing, another topic for another day. Mm-hmm. So could you tell me more about the activism part of your work? Because instead of being a voyeur, sitting on the sidelines and watching things, what is the activism part and aspect of what you do?
So my activism comes across in two forms: via the internet/social media, but then also in-person type of interactions. So the photo project was that social media type of activism where it led to in-person conversations, having these different representations of people who talk about how the healthcare system isn't supportive of them or how they're thriving despite having a mental illness. It's having these representations and people viewing them, and basically it gives them the motivation to say, okay, I'm going to talk about this issue and share it with my family and friends, and prioritize mental health and acknowledge that it's nothing to be ashamed of. And so I'm also always constantly sharing mental health articles on my fan page, because I feel that when we see something repeatedly, it kind of catches one's eye, and it's like, okay, this is something that's being talked about and something that I should probably look into. And then when it comes to the in-person conversations, I've done a lot of speaking engagements, mostly ones on my own through me just working and organizing. But I've also done presentations with NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And so going to psychiatric wards and hospitals and different venues and basically sharing my story of what it is to live with a mental illness and how I've been able to work in my recovery, and also just going to different colleges and advocating for students of color and just students in general, because when it comes to higher education, they're always thinking about liabilities. And I think that a lot of these students are at the mercy of their school. So they kind of just feel like, okay, I don't want to start any trouble. I just want to graduate, which is totally understandable. And so I feel like I can come in and learn from them, and then therefore be a vessel to express their concerns. And because for me, I get to leave the campus. And so if I can speak for them in a way that they feel encouraged and empowered, that's definitely something I'm willing to do, because I feel that a lot of us do feel silenced. And if I can be some sort of support for them, and so they can feel that maybe there will be some changes and they will be acknowledged as people who deserve support when it comes to their mental health care in their colleges.
Awesome. And that's so true, because you can kind of relate that to so many things where we all want to believe that we have a voice. However, there are sometimes we're in circumstances where a voice that might not necessarily have the same repercussions that somebody else has. It's good to have a voice for those people who they will have those repercussions, but you won't. And you can kind of come in and act as that advocate to get them the help that they need, as well as the resources, and also speak to the people that need to be spoken to, but also in a way that they receive it out of respect.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a college student too, so I kind of understand the whole, I just want to graduate, I don't want any issues, because I've seen how mysteriously you get financial aid, and then all of a sudden mysteriously you have issues with your financial aid.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I totally get that. So I am curious, when we talk about activism, I did hone in on the fact that you said you had two aspects to it. The one that you were working with people of color, and on the other side, you're focusing on mental illness. What made you decide to focus on mental illness and then kind of segment it into specifically working with people of color?
I had been an activist for a while, and I was focusing on so many different issues, and I felt like I didn't have a specific mission or topic that I was talking about. I would talk about body image issues, reproductive rights, domestic violence, a lot of different things that had a connection to me, but I was kind of all over the place. And so I decided that I needed to focus on one thing. And I realized that at the root of all of the topics that I had previously spoken on, mental health was a huge part of it. And so as someone who lives with a mental illness, several, but also being a suicide attempt survivor, I just felt, why am I not sharing what I've gone through? I have lived experience, and there's so many people in the community or even just, well, let me just start where in general, people just don't talk about it. And so I said, okay, let me share my story. Let me decide, like, I'll decide to focus on mental health because it's really important. And then when I saw the results in the Google image search, I saw that it was overwhelmingly white women. And then I just started really thinking about how I felt like I was the only one, but I also felt like I was the only Latina. I always felt like I couldn't share my feelings with my family or with friends because there was so much more stigma than it is in general. Not wanting to shame your family, not talking about these issues. And I realized that it really depends on the intersectionality of one's experience. Yes, you can be a person who deals with stigma, but what about adding maybe being a working class individual, maybe being queer, or maybe being a person of color? And so when you add that on, that further influences or even can complicate the experience of having a mental health condition. And so I decided that I wanted to focus on my community. And when I say my community, I think communities of color in general, because I just felt like we just don't talk about it and not enough focus is on us. And so I decided that I would just really advocate for the people that look like me and that I see myself having relationships with. They're just so important to me. And I decided I just wanted to focus on them because we're marginalized in so many different forms, and thinking about how much racism people go through and how that really affects one's mental health. So I really wanted to just focus on a certain group because I feel like a lot of people are just focusing on mental health. And I really wanted to see what I could do that was unique and that could really make an impact on the people that are most directly affected.
Good point. Excellent point. And I remember you mentioned NAMI as well, which that would be something like NAMI kind of addresses everybody. But like you were kind of talking about earlier, before you were kind of all over the place and without being focused, you kind of felt pulled in so many directions and you couldn't really center your efforts on something so that you can make, like really make change happen in the space. So I totally understand it and I get it. And you know what? Let me ask you about that. Do you think does it really make a big difference on whether or not you as one person doing your part focus on one particular cause and in one particular niche of that cause versus trying to be, God-ish or higher power-ish or, and trying to kind of save the world?
I think I definitely don't want to be goddish or anything like that. And I mean, I think inherently any type of activist wants to save the world, but I think that one needs to be realistic on how they go about doing that. And I think it's a very lofty and very amazing thing to want to focus on mental health in general, because yes, it does affect everyone in a lot of different ways, but getting more into the deeper aspect of it and thinking about how does intersectionality go into that. Not everyone experiences mental illness the same way, and there are also outside factors. There's environmental, societal, and that's just in addition to just whatever is going on biologically. So I just feel that it's more important for me personally, I felt like it was more important for me to focus on a smaller group, because it can be very overwhelming to think about everyone, but just to focus on a small group of people who are usually not shown. And I feel that I'm making more of a difference that way. But again, that's my personal perspective. And I just laud anyone who's focusing on mental health, because it's something that has a lot of stigma and is a scary topic to bring up. And so I think that for me, this is what works. But in general, anyone who's focusing on this is really making a difference.
Awesome. And you brought up something really important. You talked about how things are scary to kind of talk about. If somebody wanted to kind of get involved with this kind of work, whether or not they are somebody who experiences mental illness, or they I mean, directly or indirectly experience it through just interactions with friends, colleagues who have been open enough to share with them,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to get involved with it. But let's talk about people who directly experience mental illness or mental health issues. Why should we talk about this publicly? It is scary. You
Mm-hmm.
know, we don't want people to know. Um, but at the same time, we don't want people to feel like they're alone. So why should we kind of care to talk about this in a format like your photo project?
I think it's really important to talk about this because there's been this continuous cycle of silence that really isn't benefiting anyone. And just acknowledging that there is ancestral trauma, generational trauma going on. And I think that while it's in the genes and there's just so much you can do, as long as you start talking about it, then the people that come after you will feel that this is a topic that is just as important as talking about physical health. And I think that when it comes to photos, I think that that really humanizes an individual. And it's like, oh, that person looks like me. And even if they don't look like you, it's like it's someone who's a human being that's going through something. And I think that we're so much focused on statistics and saying, well, what are the statistics and can you give me proof? But it's like, these are people's lives and you shouldn't have to get proof of what someone's going through. I think it's something that is valid. And I think that we need to validate our experiences and the experiences of others. And so I just want to make sure that we're talking about this and that when it comes to our quality of life, I'm thinking about communities of color and how we think, even in terms of like ancestral and generational, we want our families and the people after us to have a better quality of life. And I think that mental health is a huge component of that because yes, you can be married and have children and have a home, but are you happy with your life? Do you have a marriage where you feel like you're supported by your partner? Do you feel that you are having a good relationship with your children and that you can, that you're working in a job that is fulfilling you so that you don't come home after work and you're exhausted and you feel like, well, as long as it pays the bills. I feel that while that can be kind of a privileged standpoint to come from, I think that one's quality of life and happiness can come across in different forms. And so as long as we don't look back on life and say, oh, there were so many things that I was so unhappy with and in relationships that I wasn't being fulfilled or validated, I think why can't we prioritize our self-care and our happiness so that when we look back, we did the best that we could. Life is worth living, and it's even more worth living when you do what you want to do and things that make you happy.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's definitely important to, especially if you are experiencing mental illness or you have a history of mental illness, to, want to do more than just survive, like to have a chance at thriving in life, regardless of what that can look like for you as an individual, and then, combined as a collective of people. So I love that. So I have taken up way too much of your time. So even though I'm so sad, I wish I could keep you on. We could talk forever.
It's okay.
As a mental health activist to a mental health advocate, but before we wrap this call up, could you leave us with one final takeaway, one final actionable piece of advice that we can take with us, so those who are kind of just sitting on the sidelines wondering, okay, what to do next?
I'd have picked one. I have so many things going on in my mind in terms of like so many things that we can do. Uh, I think that if one wants to share their story to, and I can't even, this isn't really an actual thing, but this is the first thing that came to my mind is that if you do want to share your story, make sure that you're completely ready and that you're understanding of what consequences might come up. And in the end, it really will help a lot of people, but also thinking about just talking about it more and sharing articles and bringing up this subject when it comes to your family. I think that those are small steps that you can make that can just remove the stigma. I think that's one thing that a person can do. Think about something that's really important to you, that you have a personal connection to, and that you really want to advocate for. And do research and see what's being discussed and see if there's something that's lacking in the conversation and how you can add to it. And just start. I think that a lot of us can get bogged down into thinking, oh, it's just not right or it's not perfect, but it's always a work in progress. And I think that as long as you start, you learn more along the way, and then you can get to a point where you feel really confident about what you're doing. And so it's important to start. It's important to talk about these issues with the community. I think that just starting a conversation can really have a domino effect that can really benefit a lot of other people.
Awesome, awesome. And before we go, where can, and I'll put your links and everything on the blog and on the YouTube channel, but those who are interested in learning more about you and your work and this awesome, amazing project, where can we find you online?
On Twitter, you could find me at Dior Vargas, and also my website, diorvargas.com. And you know, on my website, there are a bunch of links that you can go to, so that might be just easier in terms of connecting with me.
Awesome, awesome. Dior, thank you so much. Thank you for bearing with me through the technical difficulties.
No worries.
Hopefully, awesome. So everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that you gained some great value from this. Be sure to check out Dior's project. It's really awesome. If I was thinking, I would have had my little, my little paper box and put mine on there. But those who read my blog kind of already know about my issues, but I'll say it again because I'm not too shy about mine. But also, I am someone who has been in treatment for depression and anxiety, and I'm recovering from my codependent tendencies. So you are not alone. You're not alone. And I thank you so much for your time, and I wish you well. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Peace.